Welcome to What is Truth podcast, exploring truth with T. Hackinson, where we challenge propaganda and seek clarity in the current times. Let's dive in.
Hello, I'm Terry Hakanson, and I wrote the book, What is Truth? I'm going to talk about one of the chapters in this book today. It's the 10th chapter. It's called The Three Heavens. And the book has a lot of information. It has charts such as this. I don't know how well you can see that. And there's other charts, but I'm basically going to do a smattering of the Three Heavens chapter. And of course, I can't cover it all because to really get all the details, you need to buy the book called What is Truth? So it's not about money. It's about I want to try to enlighten people and teach from the things that I've learned. So the Three Heavens begins with a verse in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 2. And Paul, who's writing most of the epistles, most of the books of the New Testaments after the Gospels and Acts, he says, I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven. And so a lot of people haven't thought about what this really means. So I've made charts, and I'm going to try to briefly explain that today, and then I'm going to a second subject, and I'm trying to keep these podcasts less than 30 minutes. So I made a chart. It's not that you have to really look at it really great or anything, because the charts are in the book. And I put this chart of the first heaven, the second heaven, and the third heaven. Now, the dictionary defines heavens as a sphere or as a realm. But when the Bible was written a couple thousand years ago, people didn't really know about dimensions and realms and spheres of influence. So things were called easy, like, I know a man who went to the third heaven. Well, people can understand that. Now, if there's a third heaven, it seems logical that there's a first and a second heaven also. So I want to explain these concepts to people because I believe that, the more of the deeper things of God that people know, the better that they will have a relationship with God. So back to the chart here. We're going to start at the first heaven. The first heaven, or the first realm, is where we live. It is the realm that has 4 dimensions: width, length, height. And then when you have things of width, length, and height, you have things that are all of a sudden have matter and mass to them. In other words, there's something of substance. And then once you have something of substance, like this rock, you could say, well, how long has that existed? That rock has existed for, if I just brought it up here 15 seconds ago, it's 15 seconds old. And so we can look at our world, and our world of the first heaven has the first 3 dimensions of, again, width, length, and height, and therefore things of matter and mass have the 4th dimension of time because they've existed for a certain amount of time. Our first realm, or our first heaven that we live in, includes all the human beings, all the animals, all the trees, all the plants, all the atoms, all the elements. It includes the moon. It includes our sun. It includes our 8 planets. It includes all the dark matter. It includes the galaxies and it includes the farthest star. All things of material, which includes our entire universe. According to scientists, our universe is 13.8 billion years from, they can see 13.8 billion years in one direction. So both directions make it 28 billion, whatever it is, years old. These are things, because things of matter have age. So that is the realm that we live in. Now, the second heaven is the fifth dimension because we have the first, second, third, fourth dimension of the first heaven. Then the second heaven or second realm is the fifth dimension, which is the spirit world. And spirits are angels and demons. And I do believe that our spirits that live in our bodies actually have interaction in the middle heaven. And now the middle heaven, there's a very good verse having to do with it, which is Ephesians 6:12. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. So then we're going to go to the third heaven. The third heaven, which was, of course, in the biblical reference there, where Paul says he knows a man who 14 years ago went to the third heaven, and it wasn't a physical experience. It was his spirit took a spirit journey. It wasn't a dream. His spirit actually went to the third heaven. He says it's somebody else, but it was probably Paul. He's a very humble person for very good reasons. Anyway, the third heaven is comprised of the sixth dimension and the seventh dimension. Why two dimensions? Because the seventh dimension is God's throne room. It's the Holy of Holies. And there was war in heaven. Revelation 12 says there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought the dragon and his angels, which became demons. This war did not occur in the seventh dimension or God's Holy of Holies because no sin is allowed in the Holy of Holies. God is so good and pure that he's kind of like light is with darkness. Can darkness exist in the presence of light? No. Darkness is instantly destroyed. God's holiness will destroy anything that is not holy that enters the the seventh dimension in the third heaven, God's holy room. So when there was war in heaven, this wasn't in the seventh dimension of God's throne room. This was in the outer courts of heaven. And there's a lot of depictions of heaven throughout the Bible. And the temple and the tabernacle that the Jewish people had an outer court, an inner court, and the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant was. Once a year, the high priest could go into that Holy of Holies after he had been cleansed and totally as pure from sin as possible. Because if he entered that Holy of Holies, that's seventh dimension, he would instantly be killed. Because just like dark cannot exist in light, anything evil cannot exist in the presence of a holy God. It will be instantly disintegrated. And so that's where we had wars. And, there's many times in the Bible where, for example, the book of Job in the Old Testament, Satan, Lucifer, the devil, the dragon, whatever you want to call him, is a spirit. And he came up to God and says, hey, this guy Job, he really loves you. But the only reason is because all you do is bless him. All you do is give him everything he wants. He's rich. He's got all kinds of kids, all kinds of food, gold, everything. And he says, but if I were to able to afflict him, I bet you he would deny you. In fact, Job's own wife after the affliction says, why don't you just curse God and die? But so Satan did not meet with God in the throne room. God is not an invalid. Surprise. God comes out of the throne room and talks to Satan about Job, and out of the throne room where there's war going on. And another good depiction of this that just comes to mind is when, on the day of the crucifixion, Pontius Pilate came out of his, we'll call it throne room, to the outer courts where all the leaders of the religion at that time, the scribes and the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they all wanted Jesus put to death. Well, they couldn't come into Pilate's throne room because they're all supposedly cleansed for the Passover and it would defile them. So Pilate walked out of his throne room, stood on the steps, I would say, and says, you know, why do you want to kill this guy and all this stuff? And that's where he washed his hands of it all and stuff. So this is how God is with evil. He can come out of the throne room and interact with evil, we'll say. But he can't in the Holy of Holies because the evil would instantly die. Another depiction of the throne room is in the book of Esther, which is about it's in the Old Testament. It's about 40% through the Bible. It's not quite halfway. The book of Esther. Esther was one of King Xerxes' many queens, happened to be his favorite queen. And she was a Jewess. And not that even Xerxes knew about it or cared about it, but Xerxes was being talked to by his advisors, and one of them was name was Haman. And Haman had gotten this king to sign an edict that on a certain date, all the people who weren't Jews could kill the Jews and steal all their property. And Esther's uncle, Mordecai, came and talked to Esther and said, you got to go talk to the king about this. We got to stop this. And Esther says, well, it's everyone knows that it's a law that anyone who enters the throne room without an invitation is subject to be put to death, unless the king puts forward his scepter, a long staff, let's say, his golden scepter, and says, no, don't kill this person. I've got to take a drink. I'd take my Ricola, except then I don't talk well. Anyway, so Esther says, don't you know that without invitation, I could be put to death? And Mordecai says, well, that's why you're in this position for such a time as this. And she did go in and talk to the king. The king sent forward his golden scepter, and he said, what's the problem? And she told the problem. And it ended up that the evil Haman, instead of the Jews being impaled, he and his whole family were impaled. And so that's with the throne room, which is the seventh dimension of the third heaven. That's where God resides. And so anyway, let's go back to the middle heaven, which is the fifth dimension, and it's spirits. Angels and demons reside in the middle heaven, the fifth dimension. Angels and demons are not part of our world of dimensions, width, length, and height. They don't have bodies. They don't have physical bodies like we have. And so spirits can actually stand in the middle of the sun, stand in the middle of a blizzard or a nuclear explosion. They can be thrown into a den of lions or a fiery furnace. No effect, because they're not physical. They're not part of the first heaven of width, length, and height, things of substance. And these spirits, I'm trying to hold it. So, I know this isn't really clear, but it's kind of what you'll find in the book. So I'm just trying to use it as a guide, really, for me. The angels and demons travel between all three dimensions, all three, not dimensions, the three realms, the three heavens. They can go into the third heaven, not into the seventh dimension of the third heaven. They can go into the outer courts of the third heaven. They, of course, live in the fifth dimension, spirit, and then they also come into our world. And this is why we have wars and stuff. Ephesians 6:12 says, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." So spirits, angels, and demons can travel between all three heavens. And of course, the holy angels can probably come up into the throne room, except there's only certain ones that are allowed there. This is much longer subject than I want to talk about right now. But these are the three heavens. We have our physical world and time, dimensions 1 through 4. We have the middle heaven, which is the fifth dimension. And we have the third heaven, which includes 2 dimensions, God's throne room, seventh heaven, we'll say, and the sixth dimension, the outer courts of heaven. And so this is kind of just a glimpse of what's in the book. There are other chapters, such as spirit in the book, another chapter, that are interrelated with each other. And so anyway, I really recommend people to get the book. It talks about hell and what I call the false doctrine of people burning forever and never being tormented in hell. To me, this is a doctrine of demons. It's been a misunderstood throughout the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages began the concept that people, if they don't obey, we'll say the church, the Catholic Church at that time, well, then you're going to go to hell and burn forever and ever and ever and ever. Well, this book will explain this hell, and it explains a lot of things, such as the crimson thread, or the scarlet thread, I guess is called. And so I really encourage people to learn these things a little more. I just want to have an introduction of this. Now, before I go to the second part of this podcast, I want to thank my unofficial sponsor, Ricola. As a singer and a talker, I I live on these things. I might have a dozen a day. I might have as few as 3 or 4 a day. I might have a dozen. But I like them because they're sugarless, and you don't have to brush your teeth and get the film off of sugar or whatever in your body. And so people can buy a small pack of 19, no, yeah, 19 wrapped drops in here. They're all wrapped. Or you could go to family size, and there are 45 wrapped drops. Or you can be like a fanatic like me, and if you can find it, you buy the 105 bag. Very hard to find. Ricola, Ricola. I've got a story about skiing in the Swiss Alps that I'm going to share in another podcast. So that's one part of the book I just wanted to talk about. Now I want to talk about something else. I'm going to talk about generational culture clashes. By doing this, I went on Google and looked up the different generations. We've all heard of the greatest generation, the baby boomers, the millennials, the Gen Z, the Gen X. But I've got 7 generations that I'm going to talk about. The first generation began in 1883 to 1900. People born in that period were called the lost generation. It was some term added years later. Nobody's really even heard of it. Then 1901 to 1927, 26-year long period, was called the greatest generation. And they're the ones who fought World War II and survived the when the markets crashed in 1929. They survived, all the poverty and no food and stuff. Then there's the silent generation, which I've never heard of either, 1928 to 1945. And then from 1946 to 1964, a period of 18 years, anybody born in that time is called a baby boomer. And that's what I am. That's what they call, the reason why they called it baby boomers. In fact, it really all started this generational naming stuff because they said, well, who was before the baby boomers? Oh, the greatest generation who went and fought for freedom against the Japanese and against the Germans who were trying to take over the world. They're the greatest generation. Um, but I'm part of the baby boomers. And when these people got done with World War II and came home, they all had GI Bills and they all had these nice housing tracts that they could buy and build houses. And they had babies galore. That's why they call it the baby boomers. It's a boom of babies. Everybody's comfortable and going to school and it's not living in 1929's depression, 1930s depression, and the world was getting back on its feet. Then in 1965 to 1980, those born in that uh, era are called Gen X, Generation X. Then there's millennials born between 1981 and 1996. And then there was Gen Z, 1997 to 2012 were born. Now, you know, I don't really agree with a lot of these dates. It started out with the greatest generation was 26 years long, and then there's the baby boomers 18 years, and all of a sudden they've whittled it down to 15-year generation. I don't necessarily agree with that, but it's the new culture. It's what they're saying. I suppose they're thinking, well, because girls are getting pregnant and 15 and 16 years old, that's another generation. But I think of generations as basically 20 years before the next generation. So I want to say something about why there's problems with culture clashes. Proverbs 13:24 says, "Whoever spares the rod hates their children, but the one who loves their children is careful to discipline them." Now, for all the generations from baby boomers to the greatest generation and before, every one of these generations, when they misbehaved, follow this follow this guide of the Bible. You spank your kid. You spank your child. You don't beat your child. It says, whoever spares the rod hates their children. Why? Because they grow up to be spoiled and pampered. But the one who loves their children is careful to discipline them. Now, try to get away with that today. This is why we have screaming kids in stores and stuff, because the poor mothers can't even swat them on the butt. Some some person who's pro-choice and for all abortions and stuff will say, "Oh, you're being so mean to your kid here. We're going to send the government to come and take your kid away from you." So we have we have a generation, I'm just going to say from Gen X to now, never got any spankings. They never got any discipline. And so we have a pampered generation. And I'm not putting down, of course, everybody, there's exceptions in every generations. There's people who are hard workers and who are conscientious and they work hard and support their family and they pay their debts. And if there's a patriotic war that to go to, in World War II, they had lines around the blocks with people, with men wanting to enlist and go stop these imperialists of Japan and the Nazis. Now, the American dream is really says this: if you work hard, pay your debts, do a good job, accept criticism, you can achieve by merit the things of life that you want. This is the American dream. Anybody who works hard can have the house, the family, the food. The opposite of the American dream is DEI, diversity, exclusion. I know what it is. I just can't think right now. So, DEI. So, today, the quality of the job doesn't matter. What matters with workers of today is feelings. If somebody doesn't do a good job today and gets yelled at, the issue isn't, "Oh, you did a lousy job." The issue is, "Oh, you got yelled at for doing a lousy job." And so people of my generation who were spanked and who got fired from jobs because they weren't doing good jobs or got reprimanded or yelled at or demoted, we have this one standard of you got to do a good job or you're going to get fired. And if you don't get fired, you're going to get yelled at. But today, people of my generation, when they don't see a good job done, they yell at they yell at people because this is how we were brought up. We were brought up being spanked or yelled at or fired. Now, today's generation, people, I've seen a video, many people have seen it, where this postal worker was carrying this whole box full of mail right over to a dumpster and dumped it right in there because she wanted to take the day off or whatever, for whatever reasons. Today's world, she didn't even get fired. And you see, people of my generation can't understand this. I'll give you another example. I brought cable TV into my house and I couldn't get good internet. We tried satellite. We're kind of out in the sticks. And the cord ran over my yard for almost 3 months. And I kept telling the phone people, you got to bury this. Finally, my pet foxes started chewing on it and pulling on it. And I'd lose internet and stuff. And I'd say, come and bury this cable like you said you would almost 3 months ago. And so they had replaced the cable 4 times. On the fourth time, I got on the phone with somebody and I yelled at them. Guess what? By the end of the day, the cable was buried. It took me to having to yell and act like an old grump baby boomer to get the job done that they were supposed to do for 2.5 months. And I felt bad about it, but it's the only way I could get results. And so people of my generation don't understand a lot of the new generations where the job doesn't matter, the efficiency doesn't matter. What matters is, are you treating your employee correctly? Did you yell at them? Oh, my word, what a terrible old grump you are. Um, I know of a person who was a manager in a store, has 100 employees. One of the employees, somebody yelled at her. She brought her parents in. Brought her parents into this manager to complain. Like, my word, this is a job. This isn't I'm not a principal of a school here. I'm an employer. And so you see, it's a different culture. The Catholic priests, when they have sexual abuse, do they get fired? Do they get jailed? No, they get relocated. Um, and I just want to bring this up then and finish is that right now in January, Los Angeles County is burning. It's burning. People are criticizing the people who are managing Los Angeles. The mayor, when she got elected, I've seen it on YouTube, her saying that, well, if I get elected mayor, I'm never going to leave the country because this is my job. I might have to go to Washington, D.C. I might have to go to New York. I might have to go some state around here. Well, what a lie. When her city was burning, she was in another country celebrating uh, another DEI hire, what I would say. Don't quote me, it's not necessarily true, but proven liar. There's a water manager for this Los Angeles County, paid $750,000 a year. Now this Mayor Bowser is 299,000, not Bowser, Mayor Bass. Mayor Bowser is the DEI hire out of Washington, D.C. I know people will criticize me for saying everything's DEI. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, that's what it is. But I want to say, how well did these people do their job? Somebody making $750,000 a year and a mayor $300,000 a year left the reservoir dry since last March. The water hydrants were empty. There's not enough water, and they blame it on, oh, it's high winds and stuff. No, it was lack of preparation. President-elect Trump said as recently as October 2024, before the election, he says, um, you guys need to manage your forests here. You need to take care of things, be ready for fires. He said this just 3 months ago. They didn't do a thing about it. Are they getting fired? Are they getting reprimanded? No. You know what's happening? When people criticize them, they say, "Oh, you're making this all political and stuff. This is a tragedy, and here you're focusing on political things." No, we're talking about you didn't do your job, and that's the reason why we're having this results. People who are employed to do jobs and don't do the jobs, this is the kind of the way of the world, and I've got to learn to deal with it because I've been pretty grumpy about times when people haven't done their jobs. And I have been persecuted and ostracized when I've yelled at people. I am the bad guy when I yelled at that cable company to bury it. I'm the bad guy, but I couldn't get any results. And it took me to lose my temper and act like a not a man of God. And this is God is working on me because I'm pretty emotional about things that I consider as injustice. But I have to temper mine because I'm dealing with a new generation that's never been spanked, a new generation that doesn't get fired for not doing a good job, a new generation that did not grow up like as patriotic and say, "Oh, there's a war. We've got to join the army or navy or air force and go stop these people. We have to stop the evil." It's a different world. People are more concerned about how people react. If and I've got stories I'm going to talk about in future podcasts about people who reacted to somebody criminal attacking them, and the government says, forgets about the person attacking them. Oh, you reacted bad to this person. You called them a name. How dare you? What a terrible, evil person you are. And what an old grump. So I just wanted to touch on these subjects. I'm going to end with this, is that the world dodged a bullet as of November 5th, and Donald J. Trump was elected president. Is he going to change the world? No. He's just going to put it off for a little while. He's just going to postpone what I consider to be the end of the world. We're going to talk about some of these things in future podcasts, but I just wanted you to know that, I apologize to people who I've offended for yelling at. In my generation, this is how we grew up. We were spanked. We were yelled at. We were fired. And today's generation, that's the ultimate insult. You called me a name. Well, you didn't do your job. So I have to learn to adapt, to understand this is an undisciplined generation. And I find it so ironic that the people who would take children away from other people because they spanked them are the same people who are pro-abortion. They have abortions or they support abortion. In other words, we'll kill our kids or won't allow our kids to live, but we're going to tell you how to raise yours. And forget your Bible that says you're supposed to do this because we don't believe in your Bible. And so these are the wars that we're in, and this again is kingdom war. The evil spirits are influencing people of our material world to do their bidding. And this is why we have kingdom war, which results in physical war in a world. And it's all very intriguing. I really encourage people, you should buy this book. I'm not in it really for the money. I mean, I want to try to make my money back, but basically I want people to know the truth, and that's my goal and my mission before I leave this earth. I haven't belonged on this earth for decades, and I've asked God to remove me from it, but he won't. He removes people around me, but I'll say, okay, well, as long as I'm here, I'm just going to do what you want me to do. And then when I die, I've told my relatives, don't be sad, have a party. I'll finally have gotten my prayer request and leave because I do not belong here. And so I want to encourage people. all this decadence going on, all this culture problems, deal with it, because our kingdom, our home is not this world. Our home is not the first heaven. Our home is the third heaven. And when we enter God's throne room, instead of God disintegrating us because light would destroy darkness, the good of God will destroy evil, Jesus Christ will lean forward to his Father and say, Father, this is one that I died for. Please welcome him and her into our family, because we are covered by the blood. We are no longer seen as sinful and evil. We are part of God's family. So I want to tell people, be encouraged, but be aware of what's going on in the world. We need to be gentle as doves and wise as my foxes, which they're not really that wise, but. So thank you for your time. I really appreciate you people listening to this podcast. I'm going to be doing podcasts hopefully with every 7 to 10 days. And I want to, I'm open for suggestions how to make things better and do things better. But thank you very much. And may God bless and keep you and yours.